I'm just going to have just really going back a level from where Warren started, just to have a look at exactly what he was talking about, and that is moving further down the value chain and what that looks like for Australia. So thanks for the introduction, Kirsty. I'm Namali Mackay. I'm Managing Director of the Critical Minerals Association of Australia. I'm going to cover a few topics when I press the button here. Just a quick intro to the CMA Australia, looking at some of the specialty mineral supply chains, building the midstream, and where are we as Australia. Just a bit about us. We are part of an international network of associations. We actually started in the UK, the Critical Minerals Association over there, and we've now we have a presence here in Canada and the US, where we are really taking an international lens to the critical minerals sector. And here in Australia, we also work with an Indigenous partner organisation, I2I Global. So a bit about us here in Australia. We are effectively a strategic advisory body for the critical minerals sector. We are member-based, and we really provide advice at the intersection of geopolitics, trade and supply chains. And our aim is really to shape policy, guide industry, and to help position Australia as a leader in the critical minerals volatile market that we're facing now. So in terms of supporting the industry to move downstream, what I want to just have a chat to you about today is, that was a bit about us that I forgot to press, about, what does the critical minerals industry really look like? And one of the things that we find when we talk to lots of groups and internationally and here in Australia is really looking at the difference between commoditised versus non-commoditised critical minerals. And there's an important distinction here because they are in two quite different categories. So if you take some of the commodities we're more familiar with, like copper and zinc and even platinum, these commodities have very clear end markets. They tend to be bulk or precious. They have a fairly strong price. They're interchangeable, and they have a less volatile price in their market determined the price. In the case of lithium and nickel, although they are critical minerals, they are also moving into that phase of becoming a commoditised mineral. But if you go into the other side of the critical mineral spectrum, which is all about, I'm just going to move myself over here so I can see the screen, into the specialty critical minerals, as a lot of us would be familiar with, the markets are opaque. They're low volume, they're very highly specialised, and they tend to be produced to customer specifications in another market. And that's where there's a massive dominance by China in those sectors as well. And so the value add in some of those commodities tends to be strategic, with lower volumes and lower profit margins than your bulk commodities. So one of the things that we are looking at in some of the work we do is that actually to split these up into the types of policy environments and levers that have to be pressed with the bulk commodities, and then the specialised, low volume, very technically complex critical minerals are quite different. So sometimes just getting a standalone refining and processing industry for one group of those minerals will not be the same as when you're dealing with the very complex, small volume critical minerals. So that's one of the things that we are working on at the moment. And also just sort of going back to basics. I mean, this is obviously a highly simplified supply chain, but the point of demonstrating this is that just to say that they're not typically linear supply chains, and there can be hundreds of touch points inside those supply chains, particularly, with electric vehicle batteries, for example. And a lot of you in this audience will know that, mine sites only carry out primary processing, while others will carry out secondary processing. So this is also on a case-by-case basis, and it depends on which critical mineral we're talking about. So the midstream can be extremely complex, and there's really no one-size-fits-all for all 31 critical minerals that we have deemed as critical here in Australia. And this is something that we've really been trying to impress upon the industry, as well as the policy-making environment as well. I mean, one of the challenges there, it's the obvious stuff that you already know, is, the dominance of China in the midstream and the downstream. And so really, what we're trying to say is that to build a successful midstream industry, what other countries' experience has really demonstrated to us is that it has to be integrated. And that's where the success has come from. And so when we talk about integration, say with the upstream, which is what we're good at here, it's not necessarily just one small mine that has a processing or refining facility, because we need to be able to reach scale. And so ideally, if you're planning to integrate with the upstream, typically that scale will be reached by your Rios and your BHPs, or, as China does, a conglomerate of junior miners collectively. And that's much easier to do in a country like China, where it's mandated, and we have obviously a very different system here. So what are the factors that are needed to build a successful midstream? And we've identified 6 key factors that are essential to have a successful midstream. The first is and this is based on the evidence from around the world where there are successful midstream operations going on. So the proximity to your customer is vital. You have some materials in critical mineral materials that have short shelf lives, and active materials, and they're very unsuitable for long distance. So that's a main feature. Cheap and reliable energy, and this is something the whole industry is acutely aware of, not just here but around the world, is that the lack of cheap energy is stifling, particularly for Western producers of critical minerals. And given that any kind of processing of certain concentrates is incredibly energy intensive, this high cost can really make it unviable. And that this is an area that we feel that government could potentially, and I'm sure, Warren, you have the same viewpoint on, the need for cheap, reliable energy as well. Access to capital, I don't need to go on about that. It's a major stumbling block to build the midstream industry. It's incredibly capital intensive. And then infrastructure and co-location with reagents. We don't have a chemicals industry here. We're still quite reliant on China for those reagents that we need for processing and the midstream. Infrastructure is a huge one. I don't mean to skip over it lightly. And then, as Kirsty alluded to earlier, skills and operational experience. We desperately need to build that skill base here in Australia, and look at how we can integrate it with the rest of the world. So, where is Australia in that mix is the question. And we've done it in a bit of a traffic light system, but these are some of the things that we have to really hone in and work on in the Australian context. And this is just a very realistic assessment of where we are and where we think some effort is needed. The demand side of things is very challenging for a country like Australia. Midstream subsidies can directly support the economic prosperity of other countries if we don't get that part of it right. And so, we're very cognizant of needing to work with our partners in Korea and Japan and our close neighbours to actually stimulate some of that demand and work quite closely with them. Even though we've got a lot of mining expertise in traditional and bulk commodities, we are severely lacking in metallurgical expertise in Australia. I think that's pretty well known, and that's something that is probably reaching a crisis point here. So it's something that we are looking at very closely. Again, high cost of energy, lack of infrastructure and finance, and our geographical isolation. So these are issues that we feel taken one by one, with our natural endowment being so strong, and some of the mining expertise we do already have in this country, we can start from a realistic base and then really work on it from there. The other thing to be cognizant of is that there are we have increasing competition for this midstream production. So there are a number of other jurisdictions coming online pretty fast, and the biggest challenge for a country like Australia is they can produce and operate in the midstream more cheaply. They're not tied to the same standards, we've talked about that earlier today, as we are wedded to. And there is, as you can see, Middle Eastern, American, Canadian and EU investment going into some of those African, South American jurisdictions where they are able to get their midstream up and running more quickly and with less red tape, sometimes for the right reasons, sometimes for the wrong reasons. So what do we need to do here in Australia? We need to diversify. Those orange dots are where our deep sea ports are. But we definitely need to work with a broad range of partners, preferably in our region, given our geographic location. But we are very focused on how we can build those relationships in order to support some kind of, midstream capability, either here in Australia or right now what we're seeing is there's a need to focus on getting our critical minerals mines up and running in order to feed potentially, if not our midstream in the immediate future, the midstream of our allied partners geographically close by. So I think I'm really ahead of time, so I'm just going to end off there just to say that we are doing a big piece of work on the Australian midstream and would welcome, any and all contributions to that from the industry and from other, associations or other operators in the sector. So please do come and chat. But thanks very much, and I'll leave it at that. Thank you.